Hotel, welcome in everybody. Welcome in. Thank you once again for tuning in to Matthew Daniels TV. I am your host, Matthew Daniels, the author, the writer, the scribe, and the bookworm. But I'm not just a bookworm world, I am the real bookworm. Make sure you get it right. Y'all see the title today. We're going to be dealing with again the quote unquote slave narratives, what I like to call the oral histories of our ancestors. And we're going to be dealing with a topic that I'm sure interests all of my viewers. We're going to be dealing with the topic of the mistreatment of the Negro slaves, and we're going to be looking at firsthand accounts from the ancestors themselves. Now, I'm going to have to break this down into multiple parts, so this will be part one, but make sure if you aren't subscribed that you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so that you're notified whenever we go live, and make sure you like the video as you come in the building. Okay, now give me just a second. Let me get the PowerPoint up. Let me share my screen and get the PowerPoint up, and then we are going to get into the information. I'm going to show you guys exactly what the ancestors themselves had to say about this topic. Now, one thing that I want to say first, whenever we deal with the topic of how our ancestors were mistreated during the time period of our enslavement, there are several sources that we can get our information from. Some information has been passed down to us from our direct ancestors, our grandparents, great grandparents, etc. may have passed down stories to us. We can read books that describe what our ancestors went through. We can learn about things in school. We can watch movies. We can watch videos. We can hear things that are in songs, and generally we can get our information from various historians. Now, all of those sources are great, all of those sources are good, but the best source of information, as I always say, about what our ancestors endured on those plantations are our ancestors themselves, the individuals that were enslaved. Now, whenever I talk about the slave narratives and whenever I talk about the oral histories, again, what the quote unquote slave narratives are is a collection of works, a collection of interviews, rather, that were documented in the mid to late 1930s, 1936, 1937 era, where workers or employees of the federal government went around to the various states looking for people who were still alive that were enslaved prior to the end of the Civil War. And they interviewed these people about their experiences during slavery. Now, we also have individuals who escaped to freedom, like the illustrious Frederick Douglass, who escaped to freedom and was able to write a narrative of his life. We have individuals who are famous, like Booker T. Washington, who was born enslaved and he got free with the Civil War, and he was able to write narratives about his life. And we have several others who escaped to freedom and left us records about what happened to them during enslavement. Even if you guys are familiar with the movie 12 Years a Slave, 12 Years a Slave is actually based on a true story. And that true story was documented in book form by our ancestor, who was a free man who was kidnapped and sold into slavery, and he endured as a enslaved person for 12 years before he was able to regain his freedom. And when he regained his freedom, he was able to write about what he endured, and that turned into the book known as 12 Years a Slave. And in our modern time, that book 12 Years a Slave was made into a movie. So there are many accounts from our ancestors themselves, firsthand accounts of what they endured. Now, the slave narratives, or what I like to call these oral histories, are they are extensive. They cover some of our ancestors who were in Texas, who were in Georgia, who were in Indiana, who were in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, many different states. And so you get to see what was the same in their experiences during slavery, and what was different. So today we are going to be dealing with the topic of the mistreatment of the Negro slave, and we're going to be hearing the records from various different ancestors, and these records on this topic were compiled inside of the Georgia slave narratives, or what I like to call the Georgia oral histories, because these are oral histories and they were documented for us. So as you can see, this is known as, in the official record, a compilation of from Richmond County ex-slave interviews. So this particular federal worker went to Richmond County, Virginia, and went around seeking out our ancestors who were still alive, who were born during slavery, and who could recollect things that took place. And the topic of this compilation of quotes comes under the heading of mistreatment of slaves. And so you can see here who it was actually written by, and that was the federal worker who was part of the Federal Writers Project. And you can see who it was edited by. That's just the source of the information if you want to do further research outside of the video. So what we're going to do now, we're going to get into the actual body of the work, and I'm going to just read to you guys what our ancestors had to say. And at various points, like I do, I'm going to stop and I'm going to give you guys more historical context and fill in some of the blanks that may not be obvious from what we're reading. So let's get right off into it, family. Thank you to everybody who has joined. I appreciate your interest in the topic. So it begins, it says, there are many ex-slaves living in Richmond County and Augusta who have vivid recollections of the days when their lives were inseparably bound to those of their masters. These people have a past rich in tradition and sentiment, and their memories of customs, habits of work and play, and the superstitious beliefs which still govern their actions to a large extent weave a colorful pattern in local history. Mistreatment at the hands of their masters and the watchdog overseers is outstanding in the memory of most of them. When I was in slavery, and this is a quote, when I was in slavery, us had what you call good white folk. They weren't rich by no means, but they was good. Us had rather have them poor and good than rich and mean. Plenty of white folk mistreated their slaves, but ours never mistreated us. There was a man lived in calling distance on the next plantation who worked his slaves day and night, and on Sunday for a rarity. You could hear them coming from the field about 12 o'clock at night, and they had to be back in the fields by daylight. They couldn't get off on Saturday nights like everybody else. Whenever he bought their clothes, it was on Sunday when they weren't working. He was mean, but he was good about buying for them new shoes or a suit or anything of the like they said they needed. So first off, we see where he's describing a scenario where what we have to understand is, while there was a specific caste system set up in the United States where even the lowest white was considered better than the anybody that was black, right? But everybody that was white did not own slaves, and everybody that was white was not rich. You hear in these oral histories talk about the quote unquote poor white trash. And a lot of this quote unquote poor white trash were hired on to be the overseers, the individuals that tended to the day-to-day goings on the plantation, and the individual that watched over our ancestors while they were in the fields. Now, this quote unquote poor white trash, these individuals didn't live much better than the slaves on the plantation, as far as their hygiene was bad, their homes were raggedy. They didn't have much money, and they themselves were looked down upon by the plantation owners, the well-to-do rich white people, the land owning white people who could vote. They looked down on the quote unquote poor white trash, and the poor white trash in return looked down on the Negro, but their living conditions were quite similar. And so what the rich individuals did, they use the quote unquote poor white trash as kind of like a buffer between them and the slave. They would hire out the poor white people to watch over the slaves on the plantation and in the field, and they would pay them as the overseers. And sometimes these overseers, they would save enough money from working as an overseer to purchase slaves of their own. And this was how they would try to work themselves up out of poverty. And even when you get down to where they talk about the patty rollers, who eventually became the Ku Klux Klan, the individuals that would patrol, like the police patrol today, the individuals that would patrol and look for runaway slaves or slaves who were out without a pass, they would capture them, they would beat them, and they would take them back to whatever plantation that they came from. These patty rollers were from the poor white class of individuals. They were the ones that did this particular grunge work. And some of the meanest individuals, some of the ones who did the most harm to our ancestors while they were enslaved, came from this poor white class that existed. So they go on to say, Master had overseers, but he wouldn't let them whip his slaves unmerciful. They always whipped us just as your mama whips you now. Now, that distinction between how bad the quote unquote slave master would allow his slaves to be whipped wasn't out of him having a kind heart. They viewed our ancestors as property, and the more work that they could get out of their property translated into more profit, more money for them. So they would not want to see a lot of their slaves beat to death or beat to the point to where they could not work. Now, they did allow these severe beatings and whoopings to go on, which you're going to see in just a second, but they did not like that. They did not like to quote unquote damage the product. If you couldn't work, you couldn't make money, which is another reason why if you read these oral histories, they always say that the slave master was good about getting the doctor to see them when they were sick. Not so much because they inherently cared about their health and their well-being, but if they're sick, they cannot work as efficient as if they were healthy. So it was all about economics. The good treatment of the enslaved was more about economics than it was about them having a good heart. They go on to say, Bob Lampkin, and this is another quote, Bob Lampkin was the meanest slave owner I ever know. He would beat his slaves and everybody else's he caught in the road. He was so mean till God let him freeze to death. He come to town and got drunk, and when he was going back in his buggy, he froze stiff going up Race Creek Hill. White and colored was glad when he died. His slaves used to run away whenever they got a chance. I remember he had a real pretty gal on his place. She was light brown and was built up better than anybody I ever saw. One of the overseers was crazy about her, but her mother had told her not to let any of them go with her. So this old overseer would stick close around her when they was working, just so he could get a chance to say something to her. He kept following this child until she almost went crazy. Way after a while, she run away and come to our house and stayed about 3 days. When my master found out she was there, he told her she would have to go back, or at least she would have to leave his place. He didn't want no trouble with nobody. When that child left us, she stayed in the woods until she got so hungry she just had to go back. This old man was mad with her for leaving, and one day while she was in the field, he started at her again. And when she told him flat-footed she weren't going with him, he took the big end of his cowhide and struck her in the back so hard it knocked her plumb crazy. It was a big lake of water about 10 yards in front of him, and if her mother hadn't run and caught her, she would have walked right in it and drowned. Now, this story kind of highlights what a lot of our ancestors went through and what they're going to describe here in a second. There was a lot of our ancestors were taken advantage of by the slave owners and by the overseers. It was something that they were forced to endure. And many of our ancestors, regardless of what they try to make us believe, they would rather die in a lot of occasions than succumb to the horrors that was inflicted upon them on the plantation. And a lot of times, they don't like to tell us this, but a lot of times our ancestors would fight back. Okay, they didn't always just humbly submit to being taken advantage of and beaten. Yes, they were forced to submit to the institution of slavery, and the ones that didn't, they were beaten mercifully, they were killed, but a lot of them, they would run away. They ran away a lot more than we hear about with just the tales of the Underground Railroad. But sometimes, if they didn't know how to make it to one of the free states because they were uneducated, they didn't know how to navigate through the woods. And like I mentioned earlier, there was always the element of the paddy rollers, people on the lookout for runaway slaves to capture them and take them back to the plantation. Even after they ran away, a lot of times they would stay in these woods, sometimes for months at a time. But if they didn't have food, they would end up having to go back to the plantation. Just like we can see with this young lady right here. She actually ran to another plantation and hid out for a few days with another enslaved couple. But when she was found out, the individual that owned the couple that she was staying with forced her to leave. But I want you guys to look at what they say next. Pay attention to this. In them times, white men went with colored gals and women bold. Any time they saw one and wanted her, she had to go with him, and his wife didn't say nothing about it. Not only, hold on, not only the men, but the women went with colored men too. That's why so many women slave owners wouldn't marry, because they was going with one of their slaves. These things that's going on now ain't new. They've been happening. That's why I say you just as well leave them alone, because they going to do what they want to anyhow. Now, check this out. A lot of times we have the conversation about the what white men would do to the colored women. They would take them and they would take advantage of them. Okay, I don't want to use these specific words because I don't want to get my video struck, but you guys understand what I'm saying. The men would take advantage of the Negro women. Okay, but what's hardly ever highlighted is that, for one, a lot of these men had wives, and their wives were just as culpable because they wouldn't even say anything about it. They would know what their husbands were doing, they would accept it, and they would stay with their husbands. But on the flip side, get this, but on the flip side, the white women were also sleeping with the male Negro slaves. And that's one thing that they never talk about, that aspect of it, when they talk about the men taking advantage of the women, because they want to be able to, burn that image into our minds. But they never talk about what our men, even while enslaved, were doing to their women. Okay. We have a comment in the chat. Sandra Askew says, I'm Pooh. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Queen. Good to see you. Good to see you. I hope all is well. I hope all is well. But what we have to understand is, from the first hand account of our ancestors, a lot of times these wives of these slave owners, they weren't saying anything about their husbands taking advantage of the women, because they themselves were taking advantage of the men. Do you see what I'm saying? The women, the white women, were taking advantage of the male slaves. And even you had some female slave owners who weren't married who were having their way with the male slaves. So both the men and the women were being used in a sexual sense by both married slave owners, the man and the woman. But they're not going to tell you about how their women were sneaking around to sleep with the men, because obviously they don't, that doesn't make them look too good. So they're going to try to hide that history. But that's just something I want to point out, and that's just something I want you guys to know about the history. But anyway, one goes on to say, my master never did whip any grown folk. He whipped children when they did anything wrong. He didn't allow us to eat plums before breakfast, but all the children, his too, would die or do it. So every time he caught us, he would whip us. Another ex-slave recalled that you had to call all your master's children master or missus, even the babies. You never wore enough clothes and you always suffered for comfort. Us weren't even allowed to have fire. If you had a fireplace in your house, it was took out and the place closed up. If you was ever caught with fire, you was beat most to death. Many mothers died in confinement on account of taking cold because us couldn't have fire. Now imagine that. Not only did they not want us to read and write, but they didn't even want us to be able to have fire so that we could cook inside of the slave quarters, our homes where we live. Because in one sense, fire itself can be used as a weapon. So what the system of slavery did, the system of slavery itself, it made up rules, regulations, and laws and statutes to facilitate our enslavement. Okay, everything about it was to make it almost impossible for us to get out of the condition that we were in. One of the main things, again, obviously, not allowed to have anything that could be used as a weapon in your own defense, not even fire. They would rather you freeze to death than make fire, because you could burn down the barn, burn down the fields, burn down their home. And also the weapon of your mind. They didn't want you to be able to read and write because they didn't want us to have any education or any intelligence, because an intelligent mind or an educated mind, what the slave master said themselves, is unfit to be a slave. Frederick Douglass tells us this. And so even now we have to understand how intelligence and education can keep us from being mistreated and subjugated. One of the prerequisites to subjugate a people or to subjugate a person is to try to keep them ignorant. Keep them ignorant, and then keep them away from anything that they could use to overthrow you or dominate you. Okay, so we see that even fire was illegal for a lot of our ancestors to have, and they forced our ancestors to even call their children master or missus. Now this is for two particular reasons. One, because just the words are literally, words are like spells. You cast spells with your words. I said this before and I explained it, but what you call a thing and the definition attached to the word that you're using and the idea attached to the word that you're using has power, both in your mind and in the mind of the individual that you are calling that particular word. And the things that you say manifest. The things that you say become a reality because your words are used to describe reality. So you are, in fact, you are creating reality with your words. Not necessarily saying that you can use your words to make a tree. Like, I can't make a tree with my words, but I can create my understanding of the purpose of a tree. And I can manipulate your understanding of the purpose of a tree with just the definition that I attach to the word tree. Are you following me? And so when you say tree, it is inevitably the understanding of what a tree is and the function of a tree. You are creating that reality whenever you say it. Like if you are always taught that trees are made for oxygen and you need the trees to breathe, then every time I say tree, your mind, your reality is going to link back to that oxygen life-giving idea that I've placed in it. But if all I ever teach you about a tree is that, oh, we use the tree for wood to build, trees would build, trees would build, trees would build. When I say tree, I'm going to inadvertently be making you think about what you can use that tree for to build something, because I've associated the word tree with that reality. And the reality of a tree is that it's used to build. You're never going to think about oxygen and the sustaining of life. Okay, so they forced our ancestors to call the children master and missus to further put a spell on their own minds, because whether they want to or not, when they keep saying it about these children, they are naturally going to view these children, even 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, as having authority over them. They're tricking their own brain to give authority to even the children. And the children, whereas a children naturally looks to the adult as like the authority figure, just this simple word and the definitions associated with the word master and missus will train that child's mind to see themselves as the authority over even the adults, because the adults are enslaved. Nothing is random about that. But let's go further. They go on to say, my young master tried to go with me, and because I wouldn't go with him, he pretended I had done something and beat me. I fought him back because he had no right to beat me for not going with him. His mother got mad with me for fighting him back, and I told her why he had beat me. Well, then she sent me to the courthouse to be whipped for fighting him. They had stocks there where most people would send their slaves to be whipped. These stocks was in the shape of a cross, and they would strap your clothes up around your waist and have nothing but your naked part out to whip. They didn't care about who saw your nakedness. Now, remember what I just told you about the spell. The spell has already been cast in the mind of the enslaved and in the mind of the child. So we have a first-hand account of where this child, now where a child normally sees an adult as an authority figure, the spell has been cast, right? The spell has been cast, and now they are in the cultural understanding of the Deep South. So when this child with this childlike fantasy is telling this adult to go with him to do something, that's most likely foolishness, because sometimes children, they have foolish ideas. And the enslaved individual is, he just refusing to go. He's just not going to go with him. So he fought back and like, nah, I ain't going with you nowhere. So the child hits him, beats him, begins to hit him, because the child has the understanding now, you have no right, no ability to disobey me, because I'm master, I'm missus, you're the slave. What are you doing? Boom, began to beat him. So he began to fight back. Now, when he says that he was fighting back, we know he didn't punch the kid, kick the kid, push the kid down, because he would have been killed. He would never have lived to tell this story. Let's just rip that band-aid off. So just a fighting back was probably more or less just, kid trying to hit him. What can a kid do if you just grab their hand, hold them, you know what I mean? Or block the punch. Probably just block the punch. Was like, man, look, get on somewhere. 8-year-old, 9-year-old, he's trying to beat me. But that's considered he's fighting with him. He's fighting back. Even if you're defending yourself, you're fighting back. And so the child tells the mother, and what does the mother do? Of course, the mother is going to side with the child because it's the social status. So they send him to the courthouse to be whipped, showing you that this is an institutionalized thing, the courthouse. But I want you guys to pay attention. Pay attention to the style of whipping. At the courthouse, what did he say? They had stocks there where most people would send their slaves to be whipped. These stocks was in the shape of a cross. Now, we all know America, even back then, was predominantly a Christian nation. And they intentionally created their stocks that they would beat their slaves on in the shape of a cross. Now, they're supposed to review the cross as something holy that their Savior Jesus died on. But in this sick and twisted mind, to where you would own people and you would beat people for minor things, and you would kill people for the minor things, and you would look at people as less than human. How religious can you really be? They faking and fronting, and they try to clothe themselves with religion so that you would not see just how filthy they were. But you always got to look at the individual actions. So they would strip you down naked, and they would strap your clothes up around your waist and just have you, naked for the world to see. Naked for the world to see, strap you to a cross-shaped stock, and then they would beat you. And you can see how he says they didn't care about who saw your nakedness, meaning that this was in the eyes of the public. They didn't take you out into a back room and do it. They did it in the eyes of the public. So just imagine people walking down the street, seeing this, being comfortable with this, and being okay with this. Now, when you look into the history of Europe, I want you guys to think about something. When you look into the history of Europe, they did these same things to each other. When they talk about the quote unquote Middle Ages or the Dark Ages or the age of when they were unenlightened, whatever term that they want to use on it. But if you look back into the 1100s, the 1200s, the 1300s, the 1400s, all of that time leading up to our enslavement, they were doing it to themselves. They had some of the most inhumane means of torture that they used on each other in Europe, right? That these ideas carried over, and we experienced them as well during slavery, especially like a woman. If they thought a woman was a witch, you could get tied up to a stake. They would burn you just like they burn some of our people. They would hang you just like they hang some of our people. They would tie you up and beat you. They would torture you. They had instruments that they would place inside of individual sensitive areas on the body to punish you. Okay, so they had, literally centuries where their minds were just coming up with the most creative ways to punish people. And then our ancestors began to suffer the same thing, because it was those individuals from these European nations who came to the Americas and were carrying out this institution of slavery. So they go on to say, anyway, they beat me that day until I couldn't sit down. This is a first-hand account. This happened to this individual, this man. He was the one strapped to the cross. He says, when I went to bed, I had to lie on my stomach to sleep. After they finished whipping me, I told them they needn't think they had done something by stripping me in front of all them folks, because they had also stripped their mamas and sisters. God had made us all, and he made us just alike. So in some form of rebellion, this individual, after enduring what they endured, told the slave owners that basically we're all children of God. We're all brothers and sisters on this earth. Even though you see a difference in race, there's only one human race. So in stripping me and beating me, that what you have done to me, you have also done to your own mothers and your own sisters. Now, this may possibly be a woman speaking, but I'm not 100% sure. This may actually be a woman. But we'll see as I go a little further. But this individual told him that what you've done to me, you've also done to your mothers and sisters, because we're all part of the human race, showing more of a connection with that divine creator than the individuals who were supposedly Christians. Okay. They go on to say, they never carried me back home after that. They put me in the nigger trader's office to be sold. About 2 days later, I was sold to a man at McBean. When I went to his place, everybody told me as soon as I got there how mean he was. And they said his wife was still meaner. So because this individual disobeyed that child, they were whooped and sold off. She was jealous of me because I was light. Oh, so I guess this is a woman speaking. So the wife was jealous of me because I was light. She said she didn't know what her husband wanted to bring that half white nigger there for. And if he didn't get rid of me pretty quick, she was going to leave. Well, he didn't get rid of me, and she left about a month after I got there. When he saw she weren't coming back till he got rid of me, he brought me back to the nigger trader's office. So now we're getting a little more information. So the individual that's recounting this particular tale, apparently she's a mulatto. She's mixed. Father white, mother black. She's came out. She's light skinned. She's a light skinned woman, obviously very pretty. And so she's so pretty, in fact, that the wife of the man who bought her is insecure and jealous. And so she left her husband because she knew the intentions that he had for her. And so after she was gone for about a month and the husband saw that she was not coming back, he ended up setting her off again just so his wife would come back. But that's crazy in and of itself. She's that insecure and that jealous. Like, what are you even married to this man for if you can't trust him? But it just goes to show what they were willing to allow their husbands to get away with. The institution of slavery is very, very odd, and the way it exposed a lot of people at that time, the way that it exposed how they think, how they view the world, their concepts of right and wrong is outstanding. It's astounding. And it just goes to show you that, okay, yes, these stories are from the late or mid 1800s. So, it's, over almost two centuries old. But make no mistake, these same things can happen right now today. And in fact, in certain areas of America and in certain areas around the world, they still go on. See, I'm a student of history. I've studied history extensively, and I've seen what human nature is thousands of years in the past. Okay. And I've studied human psychology extensively. In the way that humans operate today, humans operated the same way yesterday. The same personalities that are alive today were alive 1,000 years ago. So make no mistake about it. This can happen now. Okay. So that's another reason why we need to be aware that this isn't just something that happened and it'll never happen again. Always stay vigilant. So anyway, she goes on to say, as long as you weren't sold, your master was responsible for you. So whenever they put you on the market, you had to praise yourself in order to be sold right away. If you didn't praise yourself, you got a beating. I didn't stay long in the market. I didn't stay in the market long. A dissipated woman bought me, and I done laundry work for her and other dissipated women to pay my board till freedom come. They was all very nice to me. So eventually she got in a better situation. Whenever you were sold, your folk never knowed about it till afterwards, and sometimes they never saw you again. This is the broken up family. They didn't even know who you were sold to or where they was carrying you unless you could write back and tell them. And most of the time, as we know, you could not write back to tell them. The market was in the middle of Brown and Center Streets. They made a scaffold wherever they was going to sell anybody, and will put the person up on this so everybody could see him good. Then they would sell him to the highest bidder. Everybody wanted women who would have children fast. They would always ask you if you was a good breeder, and if so, they would buy you at your word. But if you had already had too many children, they would say you weren't much good. If you haven't ever had any children, your master would tell them you were strong, healthy, and a fast worker. You had to have something about you to be sold. Now, sometimes if you was a real pretty young gal, somebody would buy you without knowing anything about you, just for yourself. Before my old master died, he had a pretty gal he was going with, and he wouldn't let her work nowhere but in the house. And his wife, knowing nobody else, didn't say nothing about it. They know better. She had 3 children for him, and when he died, his brother come and got the gal and the children. Now, one of the main reasons why they wanted to know if an individual was a good breeder or not, because that was the easiest way to acquire more slaves without buying them. Because if a woman was enslaved, as the laws were written out, if a woman was enslaved and she had children, her children were enslaved as well. It didn't really matter who the father was, and it didn't matter if the father was free. Even if the father was a free Negro and he had children with a slave woman, a woman that was enslaved, the children would be enslaved as well, which is why they got away with a lot of the slave owners having children with the women that he enslaved, because as long as the mother was enslaved, any children that she had, they would be enslaved as well. They go on to say, one white lady that lived near us at McBean slipped in a colored gal's room and cut her baby's head clean off because it belonged to her husband. He beat her about it and started to kill her, but she begged. So I reckon he got to feeling sorry for her. But he kept going with the colored gal, and they had more children. Wow, that's crazy. So we hear a story about a small baby being decapitated. Wow, being decapitated because this woman, the baby belonged to this woman's husband. And you know, the craziest thing about it, well, it's all crazy, but the husband beat his wife for killing the baby, right? But she never faced any kind of justice. You know, she would never go to court for it, never tried with murder, and she decapitated a baby. Now I want you guys to think about something. Now I've been pretty mad in my life, you know, and I've broken the law in my life, and I've done some things that are not legal in my life. But it takes a special kind of crazy to decapitate someone, to cut someone's head off, let alone a baby. Because it's not like the movies, right? It's not you got this big sword and one swipe, the head comes off. You know, I'm pretty sure she didn't have no big sword. She hacked and hacked. She cut through the skin, the muscles, the tendons, and even the bone, the spinal column that runs through the neck. And she sawed a baby's head off. Now, that individual is sick. That individual is sick when you think about it. And then to never face any kind of punishment other than, oh, you know, your husband beat her. Should have been in jail. Should have got the death penalty. You know, saw for baby's head. We all understand that's death penalty. Crazy. Man, that's crazy. Ain't sad. It goes on to say, I never will forget how my master beat a poor old woman so she couldn't even get up. And because she couldn't get up when he told her to, he hit her on the head with a long piece of iron and broke her skull. Then he made one of the other slaves take her to the jail. She suffered in jail all night, and the jailer heard her moaning and groaning. So the next morning, he made her master come and get her. He was so mad because he had to take her out of jail that he had water pumped into her skull just as soon as he got back home. Then he dropped her down in a field and she died for a night. That was a sad time. You saw your own folk killed and couldn't say a word about it. If you did, you would be beat and sometimes killed too. So this woman gets beat so bad. She gets beat so bad that she physically can't get up. And so since she physically can't get up, not that she doesn't want to get up, but because she has been beaten so badly, she physically can't get up. She gets hit in the head and her skull is cracked. Imagine the amount of pain and anguish that this woman is going through. And so then the culprit now, the criminal who beat her and cracked her skull, takes the victim to jail. The victim gets locked up. And the victim moans and groans all night. Of course, she needs medical attention. Her head is cracked. Her skull is cracked. And not only is her skull cracked, she has already been beaten to the point to where she cannot get up. So she's moaning and groaning because she's in pain, extreme pain. So much so that instead of getting her the medical treatment, the jailer is like, man, we can't keep her in the jail. She's making too much noise. So the man that did this to her, the criminal that does this to her, takes her out, brings her back to the plantation, and pumps water into her open skull to kill her in one of the most violent and vicious ways. And then he left her body in a field to slowly die in agony. And if anybody that was related to her said a word, they would be killed too. This is some of the mistreatment that our ancestors suffered on those plantations. Some of the most, heinous acts imaginable. And this isn't a hypothetical. This is actual facts from the horse's mouth. These are first-hand accounts of individuals who endured this and who've seen this. That's crazy. That's crazy. Look at this. A man in calling distance from our place had a whipping pole. This man was just as mean as he could be. I know he is in hell now, and he ought to be. A woman on his place had twins, and she weren't strong from the beginning. The day after the children was born, he told her to go over to his house and scrub it from front to back. She went over to the house and scrubbed 2 rooms and was so sick she had to lay down on the floor and rest a while. His wife told her to go on back to her house and get in bed, but she was afraid. Finally, she got up and scrubbed another room, and while she was carrying the water out, she fainted. The mistress had some of the men carry her home and got another slave to finish the scrubbing so the master wouldn't beat the poor nigger. She was a good woman, but her husband was mean as the devil. He would even beat her. When he got home that night, he didn't say nothing because the house had been scrubbed. But the next morning, one of the children told him about the woman fainting and the other girl finishing the scrubbing. He got mad and said his wife was cloaking for the slaves, that there was nothing wrong with the woman, she was just lazy. He beat his wife, then went out and tied the poor colored woman to a whipping pole and beat her unmercifully. He left her hanging on the pole and went to church. Here's the Christianity. Went to church. So how many of y'all are women and how many of y'all have had children? I have 3 children. And I know that after my wife had her children, I couldn't imagine her the very next day being forced to scrub a house from front to back. And then even back in them days, having a baby without the medical treatment, the medication that they give out right now. You know, even your job, they don't want you to miss not one day. They give you maternity leave. So after you have a child, they know that your body needs time to recover. But they didn't even care about that. And this one woman, she gave birth to twins. And the very next day, he forces her to scrub the house from front to back. She can't do it. She faints. The wife tried to have compassion on her, get somebody else to finish it. So the job was done. But the man was just an evil and wicked man. Ties her to a pole and beat her unmercifully after beating his own wife. Beating his own wife too. Okay? Tied her to a pole and beat her, and he left her there while he went to church. Now imagine you go to church, he's singing, he's talking about Jesus, he's talking about God. That Christianity means nothing. We just have to understand that. Their Christianity means nothing. When people talk about, oh, this is a Christian nation, this nation was founded on Christian values, it means nothing. And I'm not saying that to bash the Bible. I'm not saying that to bash nobody's religion. I'm not saying that to bash Christianity. I'm not a Christian. I don't follow the Bible, none of that. That's my own personal life. But I'm not saying that to bash nobody. I'm just telling you the historical fact. That means nothing. Nothing. Their Christianity was the Pope saying that they could enslave any non-Christians that they saw because non-Christians didn't have a soul. And from the very beginning, they was taking the land from the natives and enslaving people. That's how this country was built. So that Christianity means nothing, which is why it's always funny to me, even like right now when they talk about, oh, we need to put the 10 Commandments back up in, but we need to put the 10 Commandments back into the school. We can't take God out of the school. God never, listen, their idea of God, the idea of God in America, the idea of religion in America never stopped any heinous activity from going on. Now, yes, there were people with religion who assisted the enslaved, and a lot of the abolitionist efforts were done by the Quakers. The Quakers were Christians. So I'm not saying that Christians never did anything. That's not the point that I'm making. But what I am saying is that this facade of this great Christian nation, it means nothing. They did all kind of filth and heinous acts under Christianity. Almost every slave owner was a Christian. They all went to church. Almost every slave tell you that they were forced to go to church. So damn near every slave was the slave of a Christian. We got to get that. We got to get that understood. And even this lady, she was beat unmercifully, hung up on the pole. This dude got a human being that just gave birth to twins hanging on a pole, and he think he finna go to church and read the Bible. That man's Christianity means nothing. When he got back from church, no less, she was dead. Damn. He had the slaves take her down and bury her in a box. He said that laziness had killed her and that she wasn't worth the box she was buried in. The babies died the next day. And he said he was glad of it because they would grow up lazy just like their mother. Laziness killed her. Oh, it wasn't you forcing her to work and scrub the house the day after she gave birth to twins. That ain't what killed her. You tying her to the pole and beating her unmercifully, that ain't what killed her. You leaving her strung up while you went to church to play Christian, that ain't what killed her. It was laziness. She came down with a virus of laziness. The laziness had polluted her blood. Get out of here, man. Get out of here. And then the babies were so young, the twins, you couldn't go to the store and get Similac. They needed the mother's milk. So the babies died of starvation. And he said he was glad this man had just came back from church. He was glad because they probably would have grew up to be lazy too. Just sick. But these are some of the atrocities and mistreatment that our ancestors had to deal with. Now look at this. My master had a barrel with nails drove in it that he would put you in when he couldn't think of nothing else mean enough to do. He would put you in this barrel and roll it down a hill. When you got out, you would be in a bad fix, but he didn't care. Sometimes he rolled the barrel in the river and drowned his slaves. So remember when I told you guys earlier, is almost like a competition. Who can come up with the most sadistic means of punishment and torture? Now, again, they did a lot of this stuff in Europe. They had centuries to think about this stuff. Millenniums even to think about this stuff. So now imagine this. This guy got a big old barrel, big enough for a human to fit inside of. Now, these barrels were used for storage, tobacco, salt, grain, alcohol, things of that nature they would put inside of these barrels, okay? And some of these were very big barrels. That's why a human could fit in it. So this individual took a barrel and put nails in the barrel with the pointy part of the nail on the inside of the barrel. Then he would take one of our ancestors that he wanted to punish, and he would put them inside of this barrel with the nails in it, right? And so it's bad enough that they inside of this barrel with the nails in it, poking them in their arms, anytime they flinch, they getting poked, they getting stabbed. Then he would take this barrel and roll it down a hill. So just imagine every, as it's rolling, you just boom, every part of your body getting poked. You really can't even focus in on one particular part that's hurt because you're getting stabbed somewhere else. Your legs, your feet, your back, your chest, your stomach, your head, your ears, your forehead, your cheek, your hands, every part of you as you're bouncing up and down. I want y'all to imagine this because we're talking about the mistreatment. We're not talking about what they say in movies, what they say in books. We're not talking about what the historian is hypothesizing. This firsthand accounts from the people that endured it and the people that seen it. Imagine this barrel with nails in it. Imagine your grandma being put in it. Roll down the hill, and as the hill bumping, you hollering and screaming. Nails hitting your neck. As soon as it hits your neck, you flip. Boom, hit your shoulder, your knee, your thigh, your calf, your foot, your hand. Imagine you watching this happen to grandma. You watching this happen to your daddy. You watching this happen to your mama. You watching this happen to your son. You watching this happen to your daughter, your cousin, your auntie. Getting rolled down the barrel. And they say whenever you got out, you would be in a bad fix. Of course you're going to be effed up. And so he said sometimes when he was really upset, he would put them in the barrel with the nails in it, and he'll roll the barrel into the river. And so now you got this barrel with these little holes in it from these nails, water just filling up the barrel, and you slowly going under and being stabbed by these nails. And so when you start to drown, what's the natural reaction of an individual that's drowning? They're going to thrash about. But you're thrashing about inside of a barrel with nails in it. And so every time you thrash, you're getting poked. You're getting poked. You try to hold your breath, but you get poked. You go to scream. When you go to scream, you let out air. You inhale water. Water gets into your lungs. Savage way to die. Savage way to die. Let's go further. I had a brother who worked at the academy, and every night when the teacher had his class, he would let my brother come in. He taught him to read and write too. He learned to read and write real well, and the teacher said he was the smartest one in the class. Master passed our window one night and heard him reading. The next morning, he called him over to the house and fooled him into reading and writing. Told him he had something he wanted him to do if he could read and write good enough. My brother read everything Master gave him and wrote with a pencil and ink pen. Master was so mad that he could read and write better than his own boy that he beat him, took him away from the academy, and put him to work in the blacksmith shop. Master wouldn't let him wear no shoes in the shop because he wanted the hot cinders to fall on his feet to punish him. When the man in charge of the shop told Master he wouldn't work my brother unless he had on shoes, he bought some brogans that he knowed he couldn't wear. And from then on, he made him do the hardest kind of work he could think of. Because he could read and write. Punished for being able to read and write, and then really being mad because he could read and write better than his own son. Better than his own son. Huh? Your own boy felon. You trying to pay for him the best schooling, and here come this little slave boy can read and write better than your own son, and you mad. And instead of telling your son to do better, instead of pushing your son to do better, you punish the individual for having a sharp mind and for learning and catching on. Mistreatment of the Negro slave, first-hand account. And this was this, we got that account of the victim's brother. My master never whipped us himself. He had a coachman do all the whipping, and he stood by to see that it was done right. He whipped us until we was blistered, and then took a cat o' nine tails and busted the blisters. After that, he would throw salty water on the raw places. I mean, it almost gave you spasms. Now, think about that. This is multiple layers to the abuse. The whipping, you get beat until you get blisters. Then they take something like a whip and they bust the blisters. Then they get salty water and throw it all over the raw places where the skin is peeled off and the blisters have opened up. And then they put salty water in it just to increase the pain. It's not enough that you own these people. It's not enough that they have to do everything that you say do. It's not enough that they are your slave. And it's not enough that you get to punish them, but you have to punish them in the most extreme and horrendous ways. It's almost as if they enjoyed doing this. You understand what I'm saying? Almost as if they enjoyed causing pain, enjoyed beating people, torture. They enjoyed torture, enjoyed murder, enjoyed it. You see? Psychopathic behavior on a societal level. Not just one or two, but psychopathic behavior on a societal level needs to be studied. Whenever they sent you to the courthouse to be whipped, the jail keeper's daughter give you a kick after they put you in the stocks. She kicked me once, and when they took me out, I sure did beat her. I scratched her everywhere I could, and I know they would beat me again, but I didn't care so long as I had fixed her. So salute for that fighting back. Salute to that. And I want to tell you guys something, that there's a lot of stories too, to where, you know, when you look out now, everybody like isn't small, right? You know, and you look at people like, I'm just using an example that all of us can understand, like Shaq, like Shaquille O'Neal. You look at somebody like Shaquille O'Neal, and you like, man, this dude like 7-something, right? 7-something, big, 300-400 pounds, you know, or you see some of these bodybuilders, right? Now, yeah, they big because they lift weights, but some people, they just naturally big. They like 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", and they just solid. And they were doing a lot of breeding, so they were trying to breed the biggest, best worker. So you be asking yourself, like, what was going on with these, like, you know, with a person like Shaq? Like, can you really just imagine, how, you know, a person like Shaq being owned by somebody that's like 5'7"? You know what I'm saying? And then Shaq do something that the 5'7" dude don't want him to do. You know what I mean? Now they don't want to just kill him. And they like, yeah, hey man, you know, I'm finna tie you to I'm finna tie you to this tree and I'm gonna beat you. What if Shaq say no? You get what I'm saying? What if Shaq say no? Even if it's 2 of y'all, even if it's 3 of y'all have a pretty hard time tying Shaq down to this tree. And so it's a lot of stories where you hear about there were some individuals that they were just big, they were tough, they didn't give a damn about nothing, and they could not be whipped. They could not be whipped, and the people that owned them, a lot of times they would just give them trying to whip them, and some of them they would just let them have a free reign. Some of them they would sell off. But it's been several accounts of the slave owner trying to whip an individual, and the slave beat them up. I'm like, I'm not dealing with that nonsense today, man. Forget that. I'm not dealing with that foolishness today. They'll whoop them, or they'll beat up on the overseer, right? They'll beat up on the overseer, And sometimes what they would do, they would co-opt these individuals who were just big and strong, and they would make them the overseers. All overseers weren't white, and they would make a black man the overseer and be like, okay, look, check this out. I'm scared of you, obviously. I can't defeat you physically. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to co-opt you. If you will keep the other Negroes in line, beat them when I tell you to beat them, force them to work when I tell you to tell them to get out there and go work, I'll give you a few perks. You feel me? I'll give you a few perks. And so that's how they would create division amongst our people as well. They would put some of our people in position to be the overseer over the others. It wasn't just the house Negro and the field Negro. You got the house Negro, you got the field Negro, and you got the overseer Negro. And sometimes they were paid to be the overseer. But all of our ancestors, they didn't just take this. Like I tell people, even Frederick Douglass, when he was just 16, he whooped the slave master and he whooped the overseer. He whooped the overseer that tried to whoop him. He fought back. He won. He wasn't whooped when he was 16. So that did happen more often than you might think. Goes on to say, one ex-slave belonged to an old lady who was a widow. This lady was very good to me. Of course, most people said it was because her son was my father, but she was just good to all of us. She did keep me in the house with her. She knowed I was her son's child, all right. When I married, I still stayed with my mistress till she died. My husband stayed with his master in the daytime and would come and stay with me at night. When my mistress died, I had to be sold. My husband told me to ask his master to buy me. He didn't want me to belong to him because I would have to work real hard, and I hadn't been used to no hard work. But he was so afraid somebody would buy me and carry me somewhere way off till he decided it was best for his master to buy me. So his master bought me and gave me and my husband to his son. I kept house and watched for his son as long as he was single. When he married, his wife changed me from the house and put me in the field. And she put one of the slaves her mother gave her when she married in the kitchen. My master's wife was very mean to all of us. She didn't like me at all. She sold my oldest child to somebody where I couldn't ever see him anymore and kept me. She just did that to hurt me. She took my baby child and put her in the house with her to nurse her baby and make fire. And all while she was in the house with her, she had to sleep on the floor. So that was another form of punishment and mistreatment. If the slave owner or the slave owner's wife didn't like you, they would intentionally break up your family. Now, a lot of times they broke up the families anyway, but this was also used as a means of punishment. And one of the most extreme means of punishment, they would also talk about selling you down south, because in the south was the real rough, hard plantations. And nobody wanted to be sold down south, because to be sold down south was to be sold into a worse environment than you were already in. Okay. So it goes on to say, whenever she got mad with us, she would take the cowhide. That's what she whipped us with, and whip us till the blood ran down. Her house was high off the ground, and one night the calf went under the house and made water. The next morning she saw it. So she took two of my sister-in-law's children and carried them in the kitchen and tied them. She did this while her husband was gone. You see, if he had been there, he wouldn't have let her done that. She took herself a chair and sit down and made one of the slaves she brought there with her whip those children so till all of the slaves on the place was crying. One of the slaves run all the way where our master was and got him. He come back as quick as he could and tried to make her open the door, but she wouldn't do it. So he had to break the door in to make her stop whooping them children. The children couldn't even cry when he got there. And when he asked her what she was whipping them for, she told him that they had went under the house and made that water. My master had two of the men to take them over to our house, but they were small, and neither one ever got over that whipping. One died 2 days later, and the other one died about a month afterwards. Everybody hated her for that. So here's another instance of someone who is a psychopath. They're sick, sadistic, twisted to get two small children, tie them up, get someone else, and force them to beat these small children while you watch. Just imagine that happening today. Like, I want you to think about the things that would be said of someone who does that today. I don't want to hear, oh, this is just how it was back then. Yes, this is how it was back then. But I want to talk about the personality trait of the individual that did it. I want to talk about the mind state of the individual that did it. Imagine today you're watching the news and you hear about a woman who takes two small children, ties them up, gets another person and forces that person to beat them. And then they sit back in a chair and watch, sipping wine. Kids screaming, crying. They probably took the clothes off so they could beat bare skin. They're getting whips. They're getting bruises. Blood is beginning to run down the back. The individual that's swinging the whip is getting tired of whipping them. But this woman that's sitting in the chair is saying, hit him again, hit him again, hit him again, hit him again. Everybody, all of the slaves, they're around the house. They're crying. They're begging her to stop. It's so bad. Now imagine this is happening today. It's so bad that somebody runs off and go gets her husband. The husband comes back. He's beating on the door. Hey, stop whipping him. Stop whooping him. That's enough. That's enough. She locks the door so he can't get in, so she can continue to enjoy the show. He finally breaks down the door, gets in, and causes her to stop. What will we say about that individual? Psychopath, right? Psychopath needs to be placed under the jail. The death penalty is too good for an individual like that. And then 2 days later, one of the children die. About a month later, the other one dies because they just can't recover from their wounds. Right? Now, there's more that I want to share on this particular topic, but I did have to break it up because I do have somewhere to be in about an hour. There's some things going on in my city that I want to attend to. I'm very active in my community, so I have some prior engagements. So I did have to break this up into part 2, but we're going to go further. You're going to hear about people being thrown into the fire, being burned, being hung, being beat, more mistreatments of our ancestors, and we're going to be hearing about first-hand accounts. But I did want to bring this to you guys because admittedly it's an uncomfortable topic. It's not really something that we want to have to face or that we want to talk about. It may not really be something that we want to hear about, but it's the historical reality. It's the historical reality, and we have to be aware that if it happened before, it can happen again. You know, like what do you think is happening to all of these children that go missing every year? You know, do you think their lives are easy? Do you think they're not being punished in similar ways? Do you think they're not being violated, beaten unmercifully? Do you think they're not being killed and just tossed away, tossed to the side? You know, they always finding mass graves. You know, think about what's going on with in Gaza right now. You know, with the Palestinians and the Israelis. Uh, Human depravity knows no bounds. You know, I don't care if it's 1,000 years ago, 400 years ago, or today. Human depravity knows no bounds. And so I always like to share stories like this because you have to know what human beings are capable of, you know, and human beings are capable of anything. And but I also like to share, you know, what our ancestors went through. You just have to know your history. You have to know your history. You have to know what's at stake, and you have to know what you will never accept again, because this is how bad it will get. But this has been Mistreatment of the Negro Slave, firsthand account of the ancestors, part 1. Now, before I get out of here, as you guys know, I am an author. That's why I call myself the Real Bookworm. And oh man, I didn't even see these. I didn't even see these comments. Sorry about that. Ralph HD Boy says Black Jesus gonna beat the shit out of the white Jesus for the lies. Ian Williams says hello, good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon to you guys as well. Good to see you. Good to see you. Thanks for tapping in. Thanks for tapping in. I appreciate the love. Appreciate the love. But as you guys know, I am an author, so go and check out some of my books. I have 2 urban fiction novels: Suicide Note by Matthew Daniels, Thicker Than Water by Matthew Daniels, both available on Amazon. I have a book called Big Game Hunting by Matthew Daniels, where I'm talking all about police corruption and how me and my brother took on police corruption right here in my hometown. And I have my most recent accomplishment is I have a 12-book series called Morning Motivation with Matthew Daniels. Morning Motivation with Matthew Daniels, volume 1 through 12. It's a total of 365 short motivational stories that were created by me. I wrote these stories. I wrote 1 story per day for an entire year. And I'm telling you, if you read through these stories, it will change your life. Now, if you just scroll back through my channel for a while, I was posting these videos every day. As I was writing them, I was reading them and I was posting them. And you'll find those stories. So you can find those stories and listen to them on my channel. And you can also buy the books themselves. Just search Morning Motivation with Matthew Daniels, volume 1, or volume 2, volume 3, volume 4, all the way through volume 12. And you can support that way. But I appreciate you all for tapping in. I'm going to come back tomorrow with part 2, and we're going to finish this Mistreatment of the Negro Slaves, firsthand accounts from the ancestors. Thanks for tapping in. This your brother Matthew Daniels, aka I'm Pooh, aka the Chosen Few, aka the Real Bookworm. But I'm not just a bookworm world. I am the real bookworm. I'm doing the book game like it ain't never been done before, and I'm doing the book game like it'll probably never be done again. As always, family, may your name live on forever, and may your memory, family, never die. Hotel, shalom, ashe, peace. I'm out.